Hello, friends, and welcome back to Malicious Compliance Stories. Let's start our video with a story about how a simple email warning about a bureaucratic oversight turned into a $25,000 lesson for a college administration. Stay in my lane? Okay, but it'll cost you $25,000. A few years ago, I was the primary faculty advisor and chair for admissions to a highly competitive health science program at a small public college. While that may sound impressive, it's basically a way of saying I was the lowest on the totem pole, but had all the responsibility overseeing admissions for this program. In order to try and make the department even stronger, they added a new degree option to that health science program that largely overlapped with existing classes. In fact, the only change they had to make was to add one 8-credit-hour course to make the new degree option. Since I was so low on the totem pole, I had no part in the process for this, but as the loan advisor, I had to learn all of the ins and outs of it so I could advise students and potential applicants. Because of this, I found a problem where the new class was added to the course schedule and added to the college catalog, but it was not officially added to the new major. This would cause trouble for financial aid and down the road when they apply for graduation. May seem like a small thing, but if it's not officially required for the major, financial aid won't pay for it. I pointed this out to my supervisor, who thanked me for catching it and asked me to inquire about how we correct this. So I sent an email to someone, middle management, who might be able to help, asking questions and proposing possible short-term solutions until the curriculum committee could meet to make the changes official. After the email, there was silence for a week. Therefore, I sent a follow-up email. The next morning, I received an email from one of the VPs chewing me out for overstepping my bounds, trying to make changes I didn't have authority to make, and a reminder that they know how to do their jobs and that I was expected to stay in my lane. This email included my supervisor, multiple deans, 2 department heads, and another VP. Fine, I dropped it. I was already looking for other jobs and ended up leaving the following year, so what do I care? Fast forward 3 months, we were about 10 days away from this new class starting with the first cohort of 10 students in the new degree, and I started getting phone calls and emails from all over the place. The problem I pointed out still hadn't been fixed. Now the financial aid and registrar's offices are dealing with angry students who just found out each will have to pay for an 8-credit class out of pocket. Both departments were reaching out to me asking for help to get this fixed before the VP found out about it. I just forwarded the email I received from the VP with a message that I was instructed to stay out of this and that their bosses were aware that I was not to be involved. It's officially not my problem. And anyone who might say I should have helped and not screwed over the students, you're right. Unfortunately, there's absolutely nothing I can do at that point. That's why I tried to address it months ago, when I could have helped. The proper way to make this happen involves making the proposed changes to a committee. Then those changes would have to be approved by the executive board. For various reasons, this couldn't happen between then and the start of the class, so the VP contacted the state chancellor's office to see what kind of workaround the state would approve to get this done now. However, the college was denied any exceptions. In the end, the college ended up having to swallow the cost of this course for all 10 students. I don't remember how much it was, but it was no less than $25,000. They effed around and found out. Your superiors are victims of their own egos. Good for you, OP. And our next story. Landlord screwed with the wrong tenant. We'll start off by noting that I spent about 2 decades working in security. During that time, I worked many different types of security in many different locations. The one that matters for this story was time spent in the rental housing tribunal in a major city as kind of a bailiff. For those not knowing what that is, think a courtroom in a major city anyway. In a smaller town, it'll probably be an event room in a hotel or a community center. As you'd see on TV, but with less formality and an adjudicator instead of a judge. They functionally are the same thing to landlords and tenants, but they definitely aren't the same thing. This place exclusively deals with landlord and tenant disputes and is the only place to resolve landlord and tenant disputes. Note that I wasn't a bailiff and it wasn't a court, but these terms mostly accurately describe the situation and my place in it. For 2 years, I worked at the rental housing tribunal. It was early in my time in security. I was 18 to 20-ish. Being as it was a major city, the sheer number of cases I sat through was beyond my ability to count. I saw everything there was to see. No one's capable of surprising me with a story because I've seen them all. In detail, as a side duty of mine was to ensure all parties had copies of all evidence being presented. I did a lot of photocopying and always read and inspected everything I copied to ensure nothing got cut off or made illegible. By the time I stopped working there, I probably knew the way everything worked well enough to be an educator myself. Well, no, obviously not, but I'm certainly in no need of a lawyer either, should I ever have need to go there. I also had intimate knowledge of how the system worked beyond the actual rules. Like, for example, adjudicators would always give a little leeway to anyone representing themselves over someone who had a lawyer, or how pissed off adjudicators would get when the party was speaking out of turn. Seriously, don't do that. Skip forward almost a decade. I left the city and am in a fairly large town in the same province, same tenant laws. I have a few roommates and a decently sized townhouse. We get along well, but there's a problem. Only I can write checks, and our paydays don't line up, so I'm the one who pays the rent, and I usually can't do it on the first because roommates don't usually all pay in time. We advise the landlord we might be a day or two late, but we'll always have it by the third at the latest. They have no problem with it at all. I spoke to them myself. For about a year, this works fine. No complaints from landlord because even if we're often a day or two late, we always pay. We're also fairly quiet and don't damage the property. Nearly model tenants. I do not actually have any idea why, but one day this changed. I suspect a different person in the company started overseeing the region. One day, suddenly, we got a summons to the Rental Housing Tribunal, hereafter to be referred to as RHT, on the 2nd of the month for failure to pay rent. This doesn't actually lead to a case because we paid the same day, but now we have to pay the application fee the landlord paid in order to serve the summons. I bitched to the neighbor, who was also the superintendent, and eventually heard back that their contact at the company was down demanding first of the month, no exceptions. Well, that really didn't work for us, so we probably had to pay that fee 15 to 20 times over the next 2 years. I could have gone to tribunal over it, but we were technically without a leg to stand on, and I knew it. Maybe if I win enough times, I can ding them for harassment, but I don't have time for that, and my roommates don't care. After being split between us, all the fee wasn't enough deterrent to change our behavior, so we accepted it. If this was the only issue, there wouldn't be much story though, and around the same time the rent leeway vanished, so did mandatory maintenance. I'm not going to list everything that went wrong and wasn't fixed. You'll get a decent idea at the end. We suffered through it. We were all working too many hours at crap pay to be able to actually do anything about it. We adapted. But after about 2 years, it broke. Everyone but me moved out for various reasons within a 4-month period. I'm not going into any details on my roommates at all because things kind of exploded for a couple different reasons outside of this. No reason to dig any of that up. I'd been saving up a while and was able to quit my job without having to immediately get another, so I suddenly had a lot of time. I didn't want to stay and pay the rent by myself or have to find new roommates I could live with. And with my experience in the RHT, I knew I had the landlord by the balls. So I went for them. I stopped paying rent. Annoyingly, I didn't get a summons the first month, but I did the second, so I went with a meticulously documented plethora of evidence of failure to maintain the property and entering the property without formal notice. I had a copy for the landlord and a copy for the adjudicator. I know from experience that technically you're supposed to give the other party the evidence before the tribunal, but I also knew about that leeway the adjudicator gives to those who represent themselves, so I didn't give the landlord the evidence until our case come up. 100% total ambush. They argued they were ambushed, but the adjudicator just dismissed the case, dressed me down a little, and told me to file my own summons as I should have done. This was the petty revenge. The landlord and lawyer drove 3 hours to get there for nothing. Worse than nothing. I filed my own summons and the big day shows up. It's been about 4 months of me not paying rent at this point. I'm prepared to if I lose, but I don't think I'm going to lose. The whole thing could not have gone better. I had 20 to 30 pages of evidence and 20-odd photographs. They had nothing. They had no actual defense for our water heater being out for 6 months or us not having a fridge for a year, just to mention 2 severe issues. Their entire defense rested on us being late for rent, which actually worked against them, Once that led to the adjudicator learning how many times we'd paid the application fee and lies that had no evidence to support them. They even talked over me a few times, and I saw in his eyes the one time I opened my mouth to protest during their turn to speak, but forced myself to shut up with every gram of willpower I had, so only a squeak came out. The adjudicator respected me. He had no respect for the landlord. I'd won on every possible front. The only question was how much. It was more than I'd ever seen. I got 9 months of free rent, and the landlord was ordered to have everything fixed before the next month was over, or I'd get more. I gave notice I was leaving at the end of the 8th month and left at the end of the 9th. Because the landlord had never renewed the lease, I didn't have to give him the 3-month notice the lease specified. If you want a figure put to it, I basically got a $13,000 judgment in my favor, adjusted for inflation and rounded. I also made the landlord and lawyer drive 3 hours twice, only to lose. The landlord's face was so red at the end, I thought he'd have a heart attack. He didn't, though. Bye, Mark. No heater and no fridge equals deal breaker. I can't imagine the tribunal ruling any other way but for you. And our last story. I was born into a family of wealth and privilege. My parents had high expectations for me, but I struggled in school and lacked interest in the family business. My siblings were all successful and accomplished, while I felt like a complete failure. Feeling lost and alone, I decided to travel the world. I worked odd jobs and learned new skills along the way. I discovered a passion for photography and began capturing the beauty of the places I visited. After a few years, I returned home with a newfound confidence and determination to make something of myself. But that's not the point now. I've had many experiences and stories from my travels, and I'd like to share some of them here. I hope that while writing them, I'll also get some experience, and in time, I'll become not so crooked. LOL. Fred lived on a riverbank. About 50 meters from the house was a home ownership company area, a small neighborhood of about 30 houses. Kind of like our HOA. Fred used to mow the grass sometimes, but he didn't really look after the lawn. The land was not fenced, but the documents of the whole rectangular area of 100 by 40 meters with the house in the center belonged to Fred. One morning on a summer day, Fred noticed people measuring the area. He went to ask what was going on there, and it turned out that the HOA was going to build a small park for the residents of the HOA to enjoy. Karen, the HOA president, hired some cheap construction crew, and construction will start in a week when the final plan is ready. Fred was a little freaked out by the story, asked the men to leave, but they said they wouldn't leave until they'd measured the whole area. The police were called, but by the time they arrived, the surveyors were gone. Fred had no choice but to go to Karen's office. In fact, it turned out that Karen thought it was public land. She made fake copies of the project to buy land for the property of the HOA and collected money for the park from all residents. The plan was to build a park on public land and then to put it on the balance of city maintenance through bribes, while the money for the construction and maintenance was to be collected from the residents of the housing cooperative. Karen just didn't take into account that the land isn't state land. It belongs to Fred. Also, she didn't take into account that the plan is super dumb, even if the land was public, just for the record. That's a great plan, Karen. That's ingenious if I understand it correctly. It's a Swiss watch. You got revenge and screwed them in the pocketbook. The only thing they really care about. Good for you. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.